Okay, welcome to our next video in setting selling prices. This one we're going to talk about prime cost methods. And the first thing we need to talk about is what is prime cost. So prime cost is the combined total cost of food, beverage, and labor cost. It's our two biggest expenses, our food cost and beverage cost, plus our labor cost. So what does it cost us to make that hamburger I keep going back to? If it was $2 to make the hamburger and $2 worth of labor cost to make the hamburger, we have $4 worth of prime cost. Generally, prime cost is going to take anywhere from 60 to 65% of our total revenue out of our selling price. The combined total cost proportion and the direct labor cost needed to prepare a dish with a single portion perspective. So where does this factor in? Prime cost methods come in handy when we're talking about heavy labor to go into a dish. There's a lot of work, or we have to spend a lot of money on labor to produce a specific dish. So we might want to consider using prime cost methods to include that labor cost and when we're determining the price. So how do we figure out what our direct labor cost is? Well, really simply by observing staff working with like a stopwatch and figuring out how many minutes does it take them to make that dish, right? And then are we paying them $15 an hour? Well, then we can figure out how much it costs us to actually produce that dish. But it's physical, actual time working on the dish, not the entire time it takes to make the recipe. And the reason I want to differentiate this, because if you're baking bread, right, it's going to take 4 or 5 hours to bake bread from the moment you start to the moment you finish. Now, you didn't spend 4 or 5 hours actually working on the bread. You spent some time measuring the ingredients, mixing the ingredients, kneading the dough, but while it was proofing, your employee is doing something else. So you cannot include the price of that time into the cost to make the bread, right? It's direct labor cost. So how much time do they actually spend working on the bread? They're not just standing there watching bread rise, right? You're not going to pay somebody to do that. While that bread's rising, they're doing something else. They're scaling out another recipe, they're mixing, they're doing something else. So when you're measuring your direct labor costs, it's how much time are they actually spent working on the recipe, right? Not waiting for things to rise or waiting for things to heat up or waiting for roasts to cook, right? It's actual physical, when are you working on that dish, right? So prime cost method. Obviously prime cost equals the food cost plus our direct labor cost, and then our selling price equals our prime cost times a price factor. So what's a price factor? Well, price factor is in this method a random number that we use to determine what our sale price is. It's sort of a hit and miss kind of approach, right? You start with a number that you think is close, and then as you go through and actually calculate your food costs for the month and figure out how you're doing, that price factor may change. So over time, it can get a little bit better, a little bit worse, right? Price factor is simply just a number we multiply, right? A factor is any number that we multiply times another number. So, do we need double our prime cost to sell it? Do we need triple our prime cost to sell it in order to pay for all our expenses and generate a profit? So I got a simple example coming up here. So a restaurant uses a price factor of 3.1, and the chicken roulade costs $1.92 per portion with a direct labor cost of $1.65. So what is our selling price using the prime cost method? So first we need to figure out what our prime cost is. And our prime cost is this $1.92, oops, give me a pen, $1.92 plus our $1.65, right? Which gives us a prime cost of $3.57. Now, they've determined that the price factor through trial and error is 3.1, so we take that 3.57 times 3.1, and we're going to get a selling price of $11.07. That's prime cost method, right? Pretty straightforward. The trick is getting that right price factor, and it comes with trial and error. Okay. The next one that uses prime cost in its calculation is called the actual pricing method. Now, the actual pricing method is very similar to overhead contribution, whereas we're going to look at percentages of our expenses. So we use budgeted percentages to determine a price divisor to apply to a dish's prime cost. So our price divisor is going to be 100% minus our variable costs and our fixed cost and our profit. If you remember back to that pie, that was what was left, right? Was our food cost. Or what do we have if we don't have our labor cost and our food cost, that'll be our prime cost, right? So once we've got that, we can take our prime cost dollar and then divide it by that price divisor. So I'll show you an example here. So in a given restaurant, variable cost is 29%, fixed cost is 12%, profit is 6%. Using the actual price method, calculate a sales price for a dish costing $3.09 per portion with a direct labor cost of 88%. So the first thing we want to do is figure out our price divisor. So if we have a variable cost of 29% and we have a fixed cost of 12%, and we have profit of 6%, all of our added up percentages that we need equals 47%. So if we look at that pie again, right, we've got just under half, 47% for all of these, right? What's left in here is our prime cost. Switch colors. So our prime cost is going to be 53%, right? Because 47 or 100% minus 47 is going to give us 53%. So now if we have a prime cost of 309 plus 0.88, come on, pen. That's going to give us a prime cost of $3.97. We're simply going to divide by this percentage, but we need to change that into a decimal, which is going to give us a selling price of, punch it into my calculator here, $7.49. So similar to the overhead contribution method, except now we're factoring in labor cost, right? That prime cost is factoring in this labor cost. So again, we tend to use these methods, and I like this one better than the prime cost method because this one's a little bit more definitive. But we tend to use these methods when labor is an issue with the dishes that we're making, right? If we have large fluctuations between recipes, we might want to look at, oh, we need a little bit more labor cost in this dish, sell this dish for a little bit more because of the labor cost that's included, right? Okay, so that's it for prime cost methods. In the next video, we're going to talk about gross profit.